The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East trembles under the weight of escalating tensions as fragile diplomatic negotiations collide with unprecedented military deployments. Projecting immense naval supremacy across the Persian Gulf, the United States aims to establish an impenetrable deterrent ahead of critical strategic talks in Geneva. Despite the terrifying shadow of imminent kinetic strikes, the ultimate geopolitical resolution remains shrouded in deep uncertainty as rival nations leverage their military might. Senior American diplomatic envoys report profound astonishment as Iranian leadership resolutely refuses to fracture beneath the suffocating pressure of concentrated maritime firepower. Directly countering this aggressive American posturing, Iranian state officials have publicly weaponized their national resolve, swearing never to capitulate to external military coercion. This paralyzing diplomatic stalemate brutally exposes the complexities of modern warfare, proving that overwhelming conventional force cannot automatically extract immediate political concessions. Over the turbulent span of a decade, the Middle Eastern strategic environment has fundamentally mutated, forcing allied military planners to desperately reinvent regional deterrence. Century-old doctrines of uncontested naval supremacy face fierce challenges from emboldened regional actors wielding highly sophisticated, layered anti-access and area denial defensive architectures. The ultimate objective driving the American strategic pressure campaign is to force comprehensive treaty renegotiations without igniting a catastrophic, theater-wide kinetic conflict. Unfazed by these maneuvers, the Iranian government continuously demonstrates an absolute willingness to absorb devastating economic punishments rather than unilaterally surrender its sovereign defenses. Anchoring this massive American force projection strategy is the intimidating deployment of the USS Gerald R. the absolute largest aircraft carrier ever constructed. Forged to represent the absolute pinnacle of United States naval engineering, this formidable Leviathan operates as a heavily armed, floating sovereign territory. The billion-dollar supercarrier wields experimental electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, specifically engineered to drastically multiply sortie generation rates beyond the limits of older steam catapults. Boasting a staggering displacement exceeding 100,000 tons, the gargantuan vessel serves as the invincible central command node for an integrated strike group. Flanked by lethal guided missile cruisers and advanced stealth destroyers, the strike group projects a terrifying multi-layered umbrella of offensive capabilities across the maritime theater. Theoretically, the sheer gravitational presence of such concentrated, overwhelming firepower should instantly dictate the operational tempo and completely paralyze any regional adversary. However, the unforgiving tactical reality of maritime deployment constantly proves infinitely more treacherous than the sanitized projections engineered inside secure military planning headquarters. Mastering modern naval warfare demands significantly more than possessing advanced kinetic weaponry. It requires absolutely flawless internal logistics to guarantee total crew readiness. Shocking investigative reports published by premier defense media outlets recently exposed a severely crippling infrastructural vulnerability hidden deep within the newest carrier class. According to highly classified leaks, the mighty USS Gerald R. suffers from catastrophic operational failures crippling its internal marine sanitation and plumbing networks. This state-of-the-art maritime fortress houses a densely packed population of roughly 4,600 combat personnel during extended hostile deployments. Every single enlisted sailor and commanding officer remains entirely dependent upon a highly sophisticated yet shockingly fragile vacuum-based shipboard waste management infrastructure. Abandoning the reliable gravity-fed plumbing architectures found on terrestrial bases, these modern warships utilize volatile differential air pressure through narrow titanium piping networks. While this experimental engineering radically conserves critical vessel weight and internal space, it disastrously introduces countless fragile single points of failure throughout the ship. A solitary microscopic blockage within these heavily interconnected vacuum lines inevitably triggers rapidly cascading infrastructural paralysis across multiple classified shipboard operational decks. These cascading systemic blockages reportedly render entire sprawling sectors of the advanced warship's sanitation infrastructure completely dead for agonizingly extended and disruptive periods. Verified internal military communications reveal that thousands of heavily armed deployed sailors are currently battling massive operational disruptions regarding basic biological human necessities. Exhausted crew members allegedly endure severely extended wait times, frequently forced to stand in humiliating queues for hours simply to access functioning sanitation facilities. These severe internal logistical breakdowns pose a genuinely existential threat to combat readiness, as enclosed hygiene crises rapidly destroy the overall health of the crew. The horrific accumulation of biological waste and failing shipboard cleanliness introduces the genuinely terrifying danger of widespread, uncontrollable bacterial and viral disease outbreaks. A sudden vicious medical epidemic spreading like wildfire through the tightly confined living quarters would instantly neutralize the supercarrier's ability to launch combat operations. Compounding the immediate physical health dangers, these persistent infrastructural nightmares drastically amplify the crushing psychological strain torturing deployed naval service personnel. Sailors already endure painfully prolonged, highly stressful deployments, violently separated from their families while navigating high-threat environments demanding absolute, unyielding operational vigilance. Leading defense analysts consistently warn that extended maritime combat tours featuring thoroughly degraded quality of life conditions aggressively destroy armed forces' personnel retention rates. True military readiness transcends the mere calculation of available hardware. It fundamentally relies upon retaining highly trained, deeply experienced, and psychologically unbreakable human operators. Distressing reports indicate numerous veteran service members actively contemplate abandoning the military entirely, crushed by the heavy cumulative trauma of missing irreplaceable familial milestones. The profound emotional devastation of extended separations, agonizingly multiplied by severely degrading living conditions, engineers a completely unsustainable environment for professional volunteer forces. This glaring, embarrassing internal fragility stands in exceptionally sharp contrast against the intimidating external illusion of invulnerability projected by the mighty carrier strike group. Panicked military planners must desperately assess and rapidly neutralize this highly unique tactical vulnerability before a cunning adversary exploits it during a live combat scenario. The stark, humiliating juxtaposition of experimental electromagnetic launch systems existing alongside failing fundamental human plumbing creates a deeply striking paradox in modern defense procurement. Inside a genuine, chaotic combat scenario, desperately exhausted crew members entirely preoccupied with managing basic logistical hygiene crises cannot possibly operate at peak lethality. Modern high-intensity naval combat absolutely demands split-second tactical decision-making, rapid damage control, execution, and unbroken focus from every individual within the Combat Information Center. This glaring logistical reality transforms into an acutely terrifying problem when meticulously evaluating the specific asymmetric threat matrix deployed along the volatile Persian Gulf. The fiercely independent Iranian armed forces have strategically poured billions into developing highly lethal asymmetric anti-access and area denial capabilities over several consecutive decades. These deeply entrenched, sophisticated coastal defense networks are specifically engineered to ruthlessly counter and completely neutralize massive conventional maritime platforms nearing the Iranian shoreline. To successfully shatter overwhelming American naval superiority, hostile regional adversaries deploy a densely integrated, multi-layered defensive web of precision coastal cruise missiles and attack craft. The ultimate strategic objective of unleashing these asymmetric weapon systems is definitively not to survive a traditional, symmetric fleet-on-fleet slugfest against superior American armadas. Instead, the ruthless tactical goal is to relentlessly saturate, exhaust, and eventually overwhelm the defensive interceptor screens of an incoming strike group using synchronized swarms. Recent aggressive public broadcasts released by prominent hostile military commanders explicitly declare their absolute operational readiness to unleash high-speed, highly maneuverable naval combat assets. These chilling public warnings heavily suggest an incredibly high probability of immediate, devastating retaliatory strikes should international forces initiate any preemptive kinetic military action. The intricate strategic calculus of critical regional allies, particularly Israel, hinges entirely upon the perceived stability and absolute consistency of the American executive branch. Urgent diplomatic backchannels leak growing, palpable dread within the highest echelons of Israeli government regarding sudden, violently unpredictable shifts in Washington's foreign policy. Following tense, closed-door bilateral summits, senior Israeli leadership reportedly voiced profound, chilling concerns regarding the operational focus and cognitive continuity of the American president. This terrifying uncertainty surrounding the commander-in-chief's strategic reliability injects massive friction into the deeply integrated intelligence-sharing networks uniting the two allied nations. Recent highly unscripted, strategically disjointed public broadcasts from the American executive have severely multiplied international anxieties regarding fundamental command and control stability. Bizarre instances where critical geopolitical policy briefings shatter into unrelated domestic anecdotes force allies to desperately question the administration's capacity for theater-level warfare. Maintaining an unbreakable, fiercely unified strategic narrative is an absolute, non-negotiable requirement when projecting deterrence against highly coordinated and utterly ruthless regional adversaries. Operating in a terrifying vacuum of clear operational directives from Washington, allied nations may feel backed into a corner, forced to initiate independent preemptive strikes. Such desperate, unilateral military gambles would instantly ignite an uncontrollable, violently escalatory spiral, inevitably dragging multiple global superpowers into a catastrophic regional bloodbath. Consequently, the emboldened Iranian military high command continues to publicly and aggressively broadcast its absolute, unflinching readiness to unleash devastating retaliatory asymmetric hellfire. Simultaneously, the fractured geopolitical landscape suffers further shockwaves from severe internal political instability and catastrophic intelligence security crises detonating within the United Kingdom. Elite law enforcement agencies recently executed the shocking, high-profile takedown of a senior political figure, leveling formal charges of catastrophic misconduct in public office. This explosive investigation centers on terrifying allegations that highly classified top-tier government intelligence was illegally transmitted to unvetted, highly controversial private international entities. Such devastating, radioactive breaches of operational security threaten to completely obliterate the structural integrity of foundational intelligence-sharing pacts binding allied Western nations together. When untouchable senior officials arrogantly bypass established security protocols, the resulting intelligence hemorrhages are rapidly weaponized by adversarial state-sponsored espionage networks and elite cyber divisions. The toxic political fallout from this high-level arrest has ignited intense domestic friction, forcing desperate leadership to aggressively deflect scrutiny toward mundane domestic policy. Pathetic attempts by government spin doctors to aggressively steer public discourse toward internal educational reforms have crashed into massive resistance from relentless investigative journalists. This cowardly deflection strategy violently exposes a broader systemic rot where political administrations actively dodge absolute accountability for catastrophic national security and foreign policy failures. The deafening controversy has violently resurrected fierce historical debates regarding the toxic, long-term geopolitical bleeding caused by previous Western military interventions and disastrous regime change operations. Prominent, unforgiving critics of Western interventionism have publicly cornered former officials, demanding absolute, unyielding accountability for the massive civilian slaughter resulting from historical military campaigns. These historical military blunders, particularly the catastrophic invasion of Iraq, fundamentally shattered the regional balance of power and directly birthed terrifying, hostile asymmetric proxy networks. Establishing brutal, uncompromising accountability for past strategic failures is constantly cited by international observers as the mandatory prerequisite for restoring any diplomatic credibility globally. Instead of pursuing direct, bloody kinetic intervention, leading defense analysts now desperately advocate for strictly utilizing regional proxy forces to contain exploding geopolitical threats. This controversial, high-risk strategy demands the massive arming of localized defense forces, strategically compelling neighboring regional powers to absorb the primary combat casualties. However, relying blindly upon heavily armed, unpredictable regional proxies carries the terrifying inherent risk of unchecked weapons proliferation, potentially birthing uncontrollable new militant factions. The nightmare convergence of massive naval deployments, internal logistical rot, and deeply unpredictable executive leadership engineers a highly volatile, fundamentally unstable global strategic environment. Panicked military planners must meticulously model a terrifying spectrum of potential escalation scenarios, ranging from bloody asymmetric skirmishes to full-scale, theater-wide conventional ballistic Armageddon. Scenario 1 dictates a grinding, sustained diplomatic standoff, maintaining maximum suffocating pressure through naval presence and crippling economic sanctions without crossing fatal red lines. This agonizing approach requires burning through immense financial reserves, risking the slow, terminal degradation of deployed military hardware due to extended operational wear and logistical starvation. Scenario 2 envisions a sudden, localized kinetic explosion, potentially triggered by a fatal miscalculation or a disastrous, unintended collision between advanced naval platforms and asymmetric swarms. In this hyperlethal scenario, rapid de-escalation protocols would face the ultimate test, demanding absolutely flawless communication channels between inherently hostile, paranoid military command structures. Scenario 3 represents the absolute apocalyptic systemic failure, detonating a widespread regional conflict featuring the massive, unrestrained deployment of hypersonic missiles and advanced ballistic weaponry. Such a catastrophic kinetic conflict would instantly sever critical global energy supply chains, rapidly triggering terrifying, cascading economic devastation across the entire international financial system. To successfully survive this incredibly lethal geopolitical minefield, desperate decision-makers must ruthlessly prioritize strictly analytical risk assessments over toxic political posturing and emotionally driven rhetoric. The absolute, unforgiving reality of modern warfare mercilessly dictates that sheer technological superiority alone cannot guarantee total victory against a deeply entrenched, strategically patient adversary. Unresolved logistical nightmares, such as the pathetic plumbing failures paralyzing the most advanced aircraft carriers, vividly expose the profound limits of highly concentrated conventional military might. Furthermore, the undeniable erosion of international legal frameworks and the total lack of accountability for historical, strategic blunders heavily cripple the diplomatic leverage of Western alliances. Restoring fragile global stability demands a radical, fundamental reassessment of outdated power projection doctrines, actively pivoting toward robust diplomatic engagement and sustainable regional security architectures. Bereft of a coherent, long-term strategic vision, massive, intimidating military deployments merely function as highly expensive, temporary bandages that continuously fail to cure underlying geopolitical cancers. The ultimate, terrifying trajectory of this escalating global standoff relies heavily on whether pragmatic diplomatic backchannels can successfully outpace the rapid, aggressive deployment of kinetic military assets. As fragile global supply chains remain incredibly sensitive to the slightest Middle Eastern tremors, the terrified international community watches these aggressive naval maneuvers with unprecedented anxiety. Both allied and adversarial intelligence agencies relentlessly and aggressively monitor all encrypted communications, meticulously analyzing every microscopic shift in force posture and executive political rhetoric. The margin for catastrophic strategic error in this densely populated, hyper-lethal maritime environment is practically non-existent, demanding absolute perfection from experienced, highly disciplined military operators. In a volatile era defined by instantaneous global communications and highly destructive asymmetric capabilities, the archaic traditions of purely symmetric fleet-on-fleet warfare are rapidly burning into obsolescence. Future apocalyptic military engagements will absolutely be decided not by the sheer intimidating tonnage of naval vessels, but by the unbreakable resilience of vital, unseen logistical supply chains. Therefore, relentlessly hunting down and correcting severe internal infrastructural rot is just as existentially critical to national security as the procurement of next-generation electromagnetic doomsday weapons. As desperate, high-stakes diplomatic talks drag on in Geneva, the terrifying specter of unintended, catastrophic escalation looms heavily over every single negotiation table and regional military command center. The paralyzed international community must remain hypervigilant, aggressively, demanding absolute transparency and brutal strategic accountability from all sovereign nations possessing the capability to ignite global kinetic wars. Ultimately, the successful prevention of a catastrophic theater-wide regional war absolutely demands a profound, unwavering commitment to objective geopolitical analysis, heavily prioritizing sustainable diplomacy over overwhelming force. This highly precarious, terrifyingly fragile balance of power will absolutely continue to define the Middle Eastern security architecture for the foreseeable future, brutally dictating the course of global stability.